Thank you guys for coming. I have Bethany here. She is from the ex Jehovah's Witness community. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on your channel.
Yeah, no problem. I understand that you're an ex Jehovah's Witness. I was wondering if you could give me a little bit of information on your background. Like, tell me your story.
Yeah, I was born into and raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My father had been an elder for decades since the arrangement was instituted, and he was a Bethelite in the late '60s, so he did the full 4-year term. And my mother, he met my mother in Brooklyn. She grew up in Brooklyn, and she had been a pioneer also for decades. So they were very strong in what you would call the truth, very zealous. And uh, my mother, she just loved service. She loved helping others. If there was a single parent family or somebody who was struggling in the congregation or an oddball in the congregation, it didn't matter. She had them over. She took a personal interest in everybody and just had a lot of compassion for people. And so that was my mother. And so yeah, I grew up in a typical model family, and we were active. We were all at all the meetings. We were in service all the time. So yeah, I had a pretty typical upbringing, but there were some things about my upbringing that were not typical. um, my my mother specifically was really frustrated that there wasn't anything fun to do. Like, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate holidays. So she got frustrated. She's saying, we don't do Christmas, we don't do birthdays, we don't do any of these things. And, from a scriptural standpoint, she thought, okay, that's fine, but what else do we have for kids? So she would get really frustrated, and she would throw parties for me and my little friends in the congregation and neighboring congregations. I had pool parties, and we went to the movies, and she thought about the teenagers, and if there was single people, she used to say things like, they should have mixers for all the single people so they can like get together and like meet each other. She was always trying to think of things to do that were fun. And so
So,
that's
pretty
one way.
active social life then.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Basically, primarily in the Jehovah's Witness community, right? There wasn't any like worldly association so much.
No, they didn't say anything derogatory about other people. It wasn't like, oh, they're horrible worldly people
Right.
or anything. But yeah, it was definitely, she was trying to create a tight knit witness community. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, interesting. So what happened next? So you're growing up and your mom is kind of growing this tight-knit community of Jehovah's Witnesses, trying to give you guys an active social life, which I would view as a good thing generally, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had a great childhood. People used to ask me like, "Oh, you poor thing, you didn't, my teachers and classmates, you poor thing, you don't celebrate birthdays or Christmas." And I was actually kind of spoiled. My parents got me gifts, little gifts throughout the year, and
Mm.
they were good to me, and I had lots of good memories. And I know that other witness kids did not have that experience. So I, to this day, have not forgotten about that. So that was one way that we were not typical. She was constantly doing things like that when my other little friends in the congregation, their parents were more strict and were not doing fun things like that.
So you get to your teen years and you're turning 18. At what point was it that you kind of started to realize that it's not true?
Okay, so I I was never so I had a good childhood, that I will always admit to, but I was never happy as a Jehovah's Witness. I was always more creative. I was into the arts. And, I'm raised in this religion. It's all I know. My parents are extremely sincere. They're good people. And I knew of other really good people. And I saw this, quote, worldwide brotherhood. But part of that was half of my brain that saw that part. But the other half of my brain is saying there's something that feels very contrived and, I don't know, disingenuous or fake about all this. And I don't mean that as a slam. It just felt like I was constantly being told that I was happy. We're Jehovah's happy people, happy, happy,
Yep.
happy. So I'm thinking, why don't I feel happy? This doesn't feel right. I never felt settled in the religion. It felt like, I was raised as anything else, take a Baptist kid or a Catholic kid or whatever, put them in that situation where that's all they know and they feel kind of suffocated by it. So personally, I was never happy as one, even though I had some good memories and met some good people. It didn't feel like it was my own. I don't feel like I really accepted the faith entirely on my own because, as anybody who grew up as a Jehovah's Witness knows, there's no exploration of other belief systems. So how would I know if I maybe I connect more to Catholicism or,
Sure.
to the Jewish faith or whatever. So at 18, around that time, I got baptized at 15 because it was expected of me and because I thought I was doing the right thing for God and my parents and humanity. It's just a lot of pressure. And but I was really unhappy, and it got really bad. I had a nervous breakdown at 18, and just felt horribly conflicted. And I wanted to leave, but because of Jehovah's Witnesses' shunning policy, I stayed. And you were tossed out at 18.
I was.
Yeah, that's brutal. You're so green. You're a baby in
Right.
witness, in witness world, like out in the world, as they call it. When you're 18, you have some experience probably under your belt, and even then you're still green. But as a witness, it was just terrifying to think that if I stood up for how I really felt, that I would be tossed out or I'd be rejected emotionally or financially. It was terrifying. So I stayed with it. And basically, to answer your question, even though there were things that were off, not only was I not happy, but there were things about the teachings that didn't make sense and that felt kind of off. I felt like some people use the expression, if they're not really in a good marriage, they'll say, we're trying to make it work.
Yeah.
That's how I felt as a witness. I felt like I'm just trying to make this work. It's the truth. Where am I to go to, Lord? That was kind of my sentiment. So I throughout my 20s, I just tried to make it work and stuff down those doubts and my real identity. So
Right, very fascinating. Okay, so it was like your mid 20s roughly then is what you're saying, where you were kind of doubting it. You didn't really feel like it was completely true, but you were sticking with it. Is that a fair assessment of it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I hadn't woken up in any sense or done any research at all. I just always had that nagging feeling that something's not right here, but I stuck with it because I loved my parents and I thought I was pleasing God and that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So when I think I was, I don't know, 13 or 14, somewhere in there, when I ended up getting baptized. And from that moment on, I was fully committed to the religion, just dove in headfirst until I turned about 17 or 18. And then I started kind of backing off a little bit. But it sounds to me like you had some level of apprehension to embrace it fully. So at what point was it that what age were you when you realized that, this is just not true, period?
That wasn't until fairly recently. That wasn't until 2017. I had some adventures in between there throughout my 20s, but yeah, in 2017, I officially woke up, as they say, and there was a whole process to that.
Do you want to talk about what the catalyst was, the thing that pushed you over the edge and made you just back away from it?
So that whole feeling of I'm trying to make this work throughout my 20s, part of making it work was traveling. So, and kind of to go back just a little bit, my mother also pushed me to go to college, which was a big deal. She didn't push me to pioneer. She said she would support me no matter whatever I wanted to do. But they didn't push me to pioneer. But my mother, she's from Brooklyn. She has this like Brooklyn accent. She used to point at me and she'd say, you're going to college. You're going to college. You're going to get a scholarship and you're going to go. So she was like really adamant about it. And that's what I did. So I got a scholarship for the first 2 years and I just went to a local community college. And I saved up. First of all, I got a scholarship, didn't have to pay a cent for school, which was really cool. And I went completely for free, and they would give me book checks each semester for $600. And I would just get the cheapest, most beat up book that had highlighter and it was completely screwed up. Because college textbooks are like 150, $200 per book. So I saved up by getting the cheapest books, and I saved up for 3 or 4 semesters and ended up going to Europe on book money. So that was the beginning. And I worked also through my 20s, but that was that kick-started it. And so as, being a single sister, I was bored out of my mind staying in one place. I wanted to meet other people and broaden my horizons. So I traveled to Seattle, Chicago, New York, Holland, Belgium, Austin, just all over the place, and just made friends. That was my way of, I was not happy as a witness, but I'm thinking, this is supposed to be my spiritual family. These are the people I'm supposed to be close to. I'm not supposed to go in the world for friends and for association. So that's how I tried to build myself up emotionally and kind of placate or reduce the cognitive dissonance that I was having. I'm thinking, well, if I just keep myself so busy with interesting people and fun people, maybe it won't be so bad. So when I went, okay, so here's the thing. So I met a lot of cool people along the way, and really, really good people. And then, but the problem was, I was really struggling. Like I mentioned, I was more artistic. I painted. I was a dancer. I danced for 10 years, and I wasn't like a prima ballerina or anything like that, but I was an active dancer, and that's where my heart was. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't say, I don't want to be a witness. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to pursue. So I felt like I was constantly downplaying my real identity and just constantly living a lie, being something that I wasn't. And so I made friends and met some cool people along the way. But I went to Seattle the first time and met an awesome couple. They were in their 40s, and he was an elder and she was a pioneer, but they didn't feel like super strict or anything. They were really relaxed, and loved them. They took me in like I was a relative. They were like family to me. And so I stayed with them for the first visit, and I met a lot of great people from the congregation during that first visit. That was a wonderful experience. And then again, I said I traveled to all these places. But when I came back, and this is kind of coming around to answer your question, when I visited Seattle for the second time, I don't know what was in the water, but that was a really discouraging trip. The couple was going to be staying in another country for foreign language, and they asked me if I wanted to house sit for them for 3 months. I grew up in Texas, and Texas is the bowels of hell in the summer. It's super hot. It's like 105 degrees. And in Seattle in the summer, it's drizzly and cool and overcast, and they knew that I loved that weather. And so they're like, hey, your job is flexible. We love you. We trust you. If you want to come house sit for us for the whole summer, that's totally cool because we're going to be gone. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So I went to Seattle, and I don't know, the second time around, I don't know if there was a shift in the congregation or what drama was going on, but there was some new people, some new faces from the first time I had visited. And I'll just say it, everybody's attitude was really funky. And I'm thinking, these are supposed to be my friends or my spiritual family. So I'm spending all my time at meetings and service. Mind you, I'm away from my home congregation. I could be, I'm in my mid-20s. I could be doing my own thing and getting into all kind of shenanigans. But I'm a good JW. I always had been. And so I was trying to be active and meet people. So I was in service and going to meetings constantly because that's where everybody was. And just had several really discouraging run-ins with sisters. It was the more catty, toxic side of the organization that people don't like to talk about. Sure. So the coordinator's wife, I don't know what her deal was, but in Seattle, it's drizzly and cool and a lot of the times, but it was a beautiful spring day when I was visiting. one day I was going out in service, and a beautiful spring day. And so all the sisters, even though it was like 59 degrees outside, all the sisters were freaking out, and they were wearing like pretty spring dresses and sandals, and getting really into the weather because the sun came out, and people in Seattle like never see the sun. So they were all, doing their thing, dressing in those outfits. And I remember, like, it's just one of those things. I was out in service, and instead of saying, "Oh, here's a single sister who's house sitting, and she's here alone, let's kind of include her, or be kind of welcoming," there was a lull in the conversation in the service group, and she turned to me, and I had on combat boots and black tights, a black dress, and like a bomber jacket. That was my style. She turns to me and says in front of the whole group, "Oh, look at you. You look so silly. You look so silly in your silly boots. Look, it's a beautiful day. Why are you wearing this silly outfit?" And I had enough self-esteem that it wasn't like, "Oh my God, you hurt me so bad." But I'm just thinking, really?
Yeah.
And there was moments like that constantly. There was another sister who I had met her on the first time to Seattle, and I saw her for the second time, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I gave her a hug, and she's like, "Oh," and she was kind of like a deer in the headlights. She says, "You remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, I met you the first time." And apparently somebody told me, another sister came to me like the next day and said that the sister that I had hugged went out in service in a car group and said to the car group, "Oh," like, because my name had come up, she says, "Oh yeah," and she came up and she hugged me, and it was really creepy.
Oh, wow.
And I was thinking, would you have preferred that I punched you in the face? Like,
I know. God, some people, I know. I can tell you that there is a toxic element. I know that's true. And I've seen a lot of that toxic element kind of come out of Jehovah's Witnesses and kind of spread that kind of toxicity around the ex-Jehovah's Witness community a little bit. I haven't really been the victim of it too much, but I have seen it. So I do know what you're talking about there. But go on, as you were saying.
Sure. Yeah, no, basically, and there was moments like that, without getting into too many, but there was just constant catty moments. And I was supposed to be there for 3 months. And eventually the toxicity got so bad, I ended up getting a ticket and flying home after 3 weeks, and I didn't tell anybody. And before I had left, I was standing on the front lawn, and no Jehovah's Witness, nobody in the congregation. And again, there's people who are not malicious; they're just kind of thoughtless. But generally speaking, nobody invited me over. And I'm not saying we have to be best friends and braid each other's hair, but like, I'm here supposedly for 3 months. Nobody invited me over, except for one sister, but that was another thing. She ended up being really rude as well. But besides that one time, I was standing on the front lawn at this couple's house, and the worldly neighbor across the street sees me, and I was taking the dog out. They had a little dog, and I was taking the dog out, and the neighbor lady saw me across the street, and she says, "Hey, are you house sitting for so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "Well, you're welcome to come over and have a glass of wine with us. We'd love to have you." And I remember just feeling, to circle back, I remember feeling really discouraged, because I'm thinking, I've been here for 3 weeks with these people. And again, not all of them are bad or evil or malicious,
Right.
but I've been here for 3 weeks. It takes the worldly neighbor lady across the street to invite me over for a glass of wine. So talk about cognitive dissonance. I'm thinking this is supposed to be God's true organization. These are supposed to be my friends and my spiritual family. And I've never felt so alone. So that was a struggle to say no to her because she was worldly. So yeah, stuff like that, that was very discouraging, and I already felt like I didn't want to be there. So it was rough, but there were some good people along the way, but definitely those individuals were very toxic.
Right.
But anyway, so I got married in 2015, and my husband was a zealous witness, what you would consider a zealous witness, and devoted JW, and he and I were very happy. But we were both becoming increasingly depressed with the religion and having our doubts. And this was around 2016. And the difference was he started to entertain his doubts and do research. And that's where everything took a turn. he started to do research, and I didn't. I How do I say this? It was too scary and too exciting, if that makes sense. It was like I never wanted to be this thing. I felt like I've been, going week after week my whole life to meetings and service, being bored out of my mind, listening to the same information being regurgitated and recycled. And I'm collapsing in on myself like a dying sun. Like, I don't want to be here, but I feel like this is what I have to do because
It's
it's
like
the
an
truth.
obligation.
Yes, an obligation.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, but this is the truth, right? Like I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't the truth. So the idea that it possibly wasn't the truth was terrifying and possibly very liberating. So he started to do research and he started to wake up. And 2017, basically in a nutshell, 2017, I was horribly conflicted. I was physically ill. I was emotionally ill. I became inactive. There was an incident where I never stepped foot back in a hall again. I remember the last meeting I went to, but I wasn't allowing myself to look at apostate literature or anything like that. But so the last straw was discovering, my husband, he didn't push it on me. He didn't push what he was reading or what he was discovering on me. But when he brought up the Australian Royal Commission, that was the nail in the proverbial coffin.
That was the thing that got you to realize that witnesses were not what you hoped or thought they were?
This is not a benign organization.
Right.
No, if you can't even protect the youngest among you, that was when a switch went off in my brain. So it wasn't so much doctrinal. Doctrinal things came after that, but I thought, you can't even protect children. That was shocking to me. And then that's when everything opened up. The floodgates opened up and I started doing research. And then I came to the conclusion, this can't be God's true organization. It can't.
Right. That's good to hear. I'm really glad to hear that you ended up finding your way out as a result of that. In fact, I know a lot of people, people I've worked with in the past and everything, who have left as a result of the two-witness rule or the Australian Royal Commission, any number of issues linked to this sexual abuse situation with witnesses. So, and it's really getting a lot of coverage. So I'm honestly glad to see that the coverage is out there, that it's getting mainstream coverage, with Leah Remini's show and all over the news and everything. So,
and it's painful. But anyway, so when that happened, everything opened up. I started researching. I started to look at JW Survey, JW Facts. I saw your channel in the beginning, and then the next part was my husband and I officially disassociated. New Year's Eve of 2017, we dropped our letters in the mail, and I had to tell my parents. And
how did it go?
Well, they've been dedicated their whole life to it. They were obviously devastated and crushed. The thing is, I sent them a snail mail letter because my whole life I had been dropping hints that I wasn't happy. But when you don't want to believe it, when you don't want to believe that you've raised your child in something that could either be wrong or that's made them unhappy, that's the denial sets in. So I knew I couldn't talk to them face to face. I had tried to have conversations over the years, but it's incredibly painful to talk about that with your parents without some kind of repercussions. So I sent them a letter and I said, I love you. You're always welcome in my life, but I disassociated for these reasons. And I mentioned the child sexual abuse, the systemic chronic sexual abuse problem, the domestic violence, the shunning policy, the whole thing. And, they obviously were not happy. They were devastated. But I refused. I told myself from the very beginning, and this is just me personally, because I know everybody's path is different, but and dynamic with their family and their parents are different. But I told myself from the beginning, I refuse to grovel for love and respect. I refuse to beg you to be in my life and to love me. this is what's going on. I don't hate witnesses. I don't hate the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I do have a problem with the leadership and what they're doing.
Right.
This is really corrupt. And you know that it becomes a very emotional issue.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not just a matter of facts and logic. So I slammed them basically in the face with that, but it was just speaking facts. I can't align myself with this organization anymore. And so I know I devastated them, and it was I never meant to hurt my parents, but I couldn't live a lie anymore. And so, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I understand. I know that sometimes describing this situation, describing the fact that I was kicked out when I was 18, or your situation, that just the facts of the situation don't always do it justice for how deeply it affects people. And I feel like it's really important to talk about these things so that, the plethora of non-ex Jehovah's Witnesses that watch my channel, and atheists and whoever else watch it, so that they understand what's really happening and how deeply it affects people, So I definitely understand where you're coming from. So your parents weren't super receptive to your letter, I guess.
oh, they absolutely flipped out. Who wouldn't? Who takes that news?
Right.
I was the golden child of the family. I never messed up. I was, an active, faithful witness my whole life. So that was absolutely shocking to them. But if they were really listening to me my whole life, it wouldn't have been as shocking, if you catch what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, they obviously were not happy. They're devastated and crushed, but it is what it is. I didn't do it to hurt them. It's not about them. It's just about the situation. And they're always welcome in my life. I love them very much, but I couldn't live a lie anymore, and I couldn't align myself with this organization. And again, I have nothing against Jehovah's Witnesses as individuals. It's just intense mind control. It's intense behavior control. And, they have to live by their conscience, and I have to live by mine.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, 100%. I made a video forever ago where I was talking about how I went in service with the circuit overseer one time when he came to visit the congregation. I think I was like 10 years old or something. And these people released dogs on us. Like, you can't do that to kids, And that is why I don't...
I remember that story. Yeah.
I don't mistreat Jehovah's Witnesses. I have nothing against Jehovah's Witnesses. If anything, I view them as victims in this situation, But
absolutely.
Something I noticed you were saying earlier was, they have to live their conscience, you have to live yours. That is very true. And I've struggled a lot with the accepting that we are victims in this situation. You and I are. The fact that this organization is telling our family members to not talk to us like this is way over the top wrong. But I struggled for a long time with putting the blame where it belongs, with the Watchtower Society, and not with my mom, for example. It's really hard to accept who holds that blame and realize that. So I definitely understand the emotions flying around that subject.
Right. Yeah. And so I was basically a recluse or hermit or whatever for like a year. And then I thought to myself, I am benefiting from these brave people, these brave activists on YouTube. I think of Cedars and Fifth and you and XJW Critical Thinker, all these people. And I wanted to add my voice to the movement. And the shunning policy, there's so many things. Anybody who's left the Jehovah's Witnesses knows it's never one thing. There's so many things. But the shunning policy is precisely what kept me from leaving at 18. And I remember how it's like I'm forgiving my 18-year-old self. And I don't, maybe this sounds naive or far-reaching or overreaching or whatever the term is, but I created my channel Stop the Shunning, and I wrote Alive and Well, a healing journal for the shunned, because I don't want to give Watchtower the satisfaction of claiming more lives. And I know that that's probably an oversimplified statement, because it's a major problem and people kill themselves over it. But I'm thinking, if I can do something in my limited capacity to help empower people to know that they have value. You have value. Don't let Watchtower change the entire trajectory of your life. They screwed with it, but don't let them tell you you're not enough, or that you're worthy of death, or that you should be silenced.
Right.
And I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. I want people to be able to, to some degree, become survivors and even thrivers. This whole generation of people that have lost their parents.
Yeah, and their family members and their friends and everything. It's devastating. I agree. So let me ask you this. I have 2 more questions for you. Where can we find you outside? Like, so you have a YouTube channel, right?
Right.
So what was the name of that again?
It's Stop the Shunning, just one
Okay,
word.
Stop the Shunning.
Yeah.
And you said you wrote a book also?
Yeah, I wrote it like a journal. It's called Alive and Well, a healing journal for the shunned, and it has several self-empowerment exercises in it. I'm not a doctor. I'm currently in school for psychology, but I'm not licensed, a licensed professional counselor. I don't offer any medical advice. I highly suggest everyone who's struggling emotionally or mentally, with the fallout from this situation, that they go see a therapist, a qualified therapist. But this was my passion project. I've always loved to write, and I wanted to provide some exercises that would bolster people up. That was simple. That wasn't like a 400-page book, some
Right.
medical book. And it's on BarnesandNoble.com, and it's like $5. It's like,
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Check that out. And the other question I had for you was there a final statement that you wanted to give? If every Jehovah's Witness in the world could hear you right now, is there any message you'd want to give them?
Yes. Not only the excellent advice of doing your own research. I hear people say all the time, do research. Absolutely, do research. But also, I would say, become comfortable with being disliked. Become, even if you're not comfortable, practice maybe radical acceptance. Accept that you're going to lose people if you wake up. Be okay with not being liked. Be okay with letting that reputation that you built up, either as an elder or a ministerial servant or a pioneer, let that perfectionism and that reputation go. The truth about the truth is far more important. Life on the other side is far more important. Being your authentic self is more important. And again, I know that's oversimplified, because people have family members and they have tightly, woven, situations where they have a lot of family members and friends in the organization. They're afraid to leave, or they can't leave, or their business is tied up with JWs. So I'm not making any oversimplified statements, but become comfortable with not being liked, and not, you left and then it's, oh, I heard so-and-so became apostate, or people are going to think this about me or that about me. Let it go. It doesn't matter. This is your life.
That's a fair statement, and I think that your reputation on the inside is so precarious anyways. You have to do so much to keep it up that you should become comfortable with it anyways, just because chances are eventually something's going to happen and people are going to view you a certain way. I mean, it's a gossip chain.
It's a gossip chain. They don't matter. And just another thing, and meaning the opinions don't matter. I'm not saying they're necessarily bad people, but also, just one last piece of advice: don't harbor any fantasies that people are going to remain your friends.
Right.
I'll be shocked, if a lot of people come back and be like, oh, I told them it wasn't the truth and I still have best friends in the organization. Get over that. They're not your friends, and it's not because they're bad people necessarily. They're just under the control. They're under the control of Watchtower. So prepare yourself emotionally for losing people, losing friends, and losing that reputation. It doesn't matter, like you said,
Right. Yeah, I can agree with that. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me. It's been really interesting, and maybe I'll talk to you again sometime, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks so
All
much.
right.